Hi parents, hello. I hope this works because it looks kind of so different today again. My setup is constantly changing. If you can see me, if you can hear me, please let me know. And thank you so much for your patience and thank you for waiting. Be careful. I've noticed a bunch of comments in the last few minutes from spammer, like we're being attacked, it seems like. So don't click on any weird links you're seeing out there in the comments. Welcome. It's Petra Deeter, and today we're gonna have a very interesting discussion. I'm really excited about this talk. We have a special guest with us. We have Dr. Edward Kruk. He's from University of British Columbia, and his research is specialized in child and family policy and shared parenting. I Thank you so much, Dr. Kruk, for being here with us. I'm really grateful for you because you have done a lot of work to demonstrate that parental alienation is a form of family violence and child abuse, which is such an important recognition that is sort of really lack in this field. Guys, give me a second. I really need to kind of ban some of these spam comment. I've noticed. Okay, I think. All right. Hopefully, please don't click anything that you guys see in the chat. I apologize. Jane, thank you so much. Jane is from Portugal. Where are you guys calling in from? Okay, so today we're going to be talking about, we're going to start out talking about parental alienation and looking at the understanding of it and the structure of it, and how do we see that the impact on children and on family, and why it is a form of family violence and child abuse. And then we're going to go into the second part where we're going to talk about the solution. And Dr. Kruk has this 4-pillar solution approach that I think is very important for us to discuss. And what I really appreciate about his approach is that he recognized that this is not about rights. This is not about father rights versus mother's rights. This is really about responsibility and what is in the children's best interest. And I think that's really a very important conversation. Before I really go into that, I do want to remind you guys, if you are not already subscribed to our mailing list, please do. On our website, victimtohero.com, you go to the top right hand corner, you can put your email address in there. And also I did say that we in a few days, I expecting maybe on Tuesday, I should have all the information that we need regarding our retreat in February in Vietnam. So before I go into this discussion, I do want to show you guys some photos of that retreat, because it should be really a lot of fun. So just allow me to show you guys some of this. Let me see if I can share the screen with you guys. I'm really excited. It's gonna be 6 days, 5 nights in Vietnam. And so this is a boutique resort. It's an oceanfront resort. And we're going to get together. It's going to be time for you to reset and reconnect. We're going to talk about healing. We're going to talk about letting go. We're going to talk about resetting. We're going to talk about finding yourself and connecting with the community. We're going to talk about understanding parental alienation. And okay, so those are a few of the photos of the place. And I hope that you can join us. Like I said, on Tuesday, we're going to be able to get the information and share with you guys. We're still trying to figure out a few details about visa and logistics and things like that, but it should be a great time. So anyway, let's get into this. So Dr. Kruk, thank you so much for being here. So like I mentioned, we're going to have 2 parts of this conversation. Let me just make sure I can see. Again, the spammer, I don't understand. Sometimes we just get really crazy spam. Okay. All right, Mara, thank you so much. She's calling in from North Carolina. Okay, so let's talk about parental alienation. Let's talk about the definition. Okay, to you, like, what is your definition of parental alienation, and how do you see that being the family violence and child abuse?
Okay, wow. 2 very big questions. So parental alienation is basically poisoning a child's mind against a parent. A situation in which a child had a loving and caring parent, or, that parent was a loving, involved, attached. Essentially, if you want to really get down to the basics of what is parental alienation, it's robbing a child of a parent's love. It's usually done in an unthinking way. It could be calculated, it could be just sort of automatic, but yeah, it's unthinking in the sense that it completely disengages the alienator's mind is completely disengaged from the needs of the child, because when you hate one parent, when you denigrate that parent, which is what happens in parental alienation, you're basically denigrating the child. They end up in a situation of self-hatred, because they see themselves as very much, half of them as their mother, half of them as their father. And if you denigrate that one side, well, yeah. So there's no thinking or consideration about the child's needs. And the impact of the child on this is just, often it's revenge. Often it's just person being, very self-centered and completely unattuned to both, to the child. Basically, it's, wanting to exact revenge, perhaps, or it could just be, power, a situation of power over the other, someone who admires and wants and is addicted to power. So, as a form of child abuse and family violence, well, so, basically, there are two main components of parental alienation, and these two components coincide to what is essentially the definition of child abuse. So the two main features of parental alienation are the child's unjustified rejection of one of their parents and refusal of contact with that parent. And secondly, the alienating power's abusive strategies to denigrate the parent. When you look at the two components of child abuse are, that it's a significant form of harm onto the child. So, to be taught to hate a parent, that just doesn't come naturally to a child. That's in itself a significant form of harm. It harms them. And the second thing is the alienating parent's abusive strategies to denigrate the other parent. It's they're taking actions that are, leading to substantial harm of the child. The situation is one in which the child refuses contact, expresses hatred. There was a prior positive relationship between the child and the parent who is now rejected. There's no issue of violence or neglect or abuse or deficient parenting by the targeted parent. Okay, there isn't a history of violence and abuse here. It was a positive relationship and a loving and nurturing relationship. There are these multiple alienating behaviors by the alienating parent. And then
sorry, I apologize for interrupting. I do wanted to touch on something that you just kind of bring up, which is really important, because the question in the chat room that said from, I think Kelly said, so if a parent is abusive and doesn't have a bond, it's not an alienation. And I do want to really confirm this, is that we never are supportive of an abusive parent. That would never be considered
of any kind of abuse.
Exactly, thank you. Right, so it's very important, and sometimes domestic violence group tends to think that parental alienation advocates are advocates for child abuse. No, we do not ever support it.
It's the opposite, in fact.
Exactly right. So if you have a parent that is abusive and therefore result in the rejection of a child, that is not alienation. Alienation is not estrangement, and that's so important what Dr. Kruk mentioned, which is the unjustified rejection of the child, and there has to be no prior deficient parenting or abusive behaviors, history of abusive behaviors and actions, things like that. So thank you. I apologize. And I do appreciate people calling in from all around the world. We do have, Amy from Long Island in New York. We got Georgia from Stanley from Georgia, Claudia from Texas. Lars is somewhere from Europe. I do see different comments and questions. Please do post question. Kelly, I do wanted to clarify. Kelly said it's men holding power over women. This is not a gender issue whatsoever. So I do want to clarify that. She said it's an unequal balance. Yes, there's definitely a power balance issues here, but it's not a gender issues. So, but yeah, please continue, Dr. Kruk.
Yeah. So some people actually frame this as a father's rights issue. It's nothing of the sort, because fathers are just as capable of alienating a parent, the other parent, as the mother, but yeah, there is a massive power imbalance here because the alienator is kind of getting away with it. And it's a significant mental disturbance and form of harm of the child. And it's also a form of child abuse because the other parent is extremely distressed with the knowledge that the child is suffering as a result of the alienation, and they're unable to do anything about it. In fact, they're kind of out of the picture, forcefully taken out of the picture. So yeah, it's just a very negative situation for the child, but also for the parent. In severe cases, it really wreaks havoc. But the behaviors of alienators in severe situations where there's little or no contact are really pretty disturbing behaviors. And I think it should raise alarm bells with anyone when, okay, I can go through a few of these behaviors of alienators to show you just how power, how much of an abuse of power it is. So the first one, it's basically the definition. Okay, the first one is seizing the child by force. Just simple, 5 words here. But believe it or not, that is the actual definition. If you look in the dictionary, you'll find that the definition of rape is seizing by force. And this is what, seizing the child by force. Secondly, there's this belief in one's entitlement as the only legitimate parent in the child's life, and no validation or recognition of the importance of the other parent in the child's life. And in the parent's life, the child is such a central figure. So yeah, there seems to be, when I say it's unthinking, it's just this sense of entitlement. You don't even, there's no consideration of, the other side of things. A third indicator is seeming, what appears to be a complete insensitivity to the effects on the child of your own behavior. You have disregard for the child. Because you're not tuned in any way to the child's needs. Children need both parents, and they need to be shielded from abuse. And here, both are being violated. So, alienating parents have no sense of, having any problem with engaging in conflict in front of the child, okay? There'll be a big scene. The child isn't even on their radar. The other parent often leaves the situation because they don't want children to witness. But overall, there's a lack of emotional depth to the relationship with the child, lack of emotional responsiveness. But at the same time, you kind of parentify your child. The alienator does. Sort of considers the child now the replacement for the other parent, perhaps. It's not sort of a healthy parent-child dynamic there.
So I see in the chat room, Kurs just said this is precisely what happened with myself and my children. Their mothers and the in-laws abducted and kidnapped my children from their
Yeah,
father and through the
yeah,
family court. Now, I
exactly.
do see Kelly is blasting the chat room with misinformation, and she's trying to cite Myers' study. So we're going to talk about that a bit later.
Okay.
There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation, and I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt that Kelly is genuinely misunderstanding, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of sort
Well,
of
I can quickly address it now, just in a minute. You know, it's shocking that people like Myers are being recognized and put at the forefront by the media. So I guess the media have biases, you know, in regard to this issue. But her study was not actually peer reviewed by a panel of scientists. So, you know, not only this is the big red flag in terms of quoting research, like any kind of research. Um, so it was not peer reviewed by a panel of scientists. It's like an opinion piece. You know, she may be citing data, but it's in the scientific community. It's not really regarded in any serious way, her research, period, because it wasn't peer reviewed. You know, it didn't go through that process of scientific review. And so at this point, it's just her opinion. So to cite it as like, you know, evidence, scientific evidence, no, it's not legit, period.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. I want us to be able to actually focus on the content of this talk instead of spreading more misinformation. So I'm going to respectfully ask that Kelly, if you could just respectfully let the rest of the community to be able to focus on this discussion. Now, Dr. Kruk just went through and touched on a number of alienating behaviors. And I know that a lot of you guys have your specific stories. I know the hurt that you're going through. I know the pain that you're going through, and I know that you relate to some of the alienating behaviors that Dr. Kruk mentioned. I would love to hear the kind of alienating behaviors that you are experiencing yourself. If you are familiar with the 5-factor models, there are 17 behaviors that identify that, but they are not like exclusive. Like there's a lot more than that, and there's a lot more
Yeah.
details.
I
So
see,
if you wanted to,
if I could just jump in, sorry about that.
no, please.
Dr. Baker's study, you know, was looking at alienation from the perspective of an alienated child. So she interviewed young adults who were survivors of, or, you know, or victims, whatever, you know, of parental alienation. My own study is based on the perspective of the alienated parent who is thinking about, because they're kind of tuned in to how the child is experiencing this. So, you know, I asked them about, yeah, both the child and their own sort of effects on themselves. I have that perspective. But the other thing that differs is that Dr. Baker looked at alienation generally, the whole spectrum from mild to severe. Mine is like really looking at those situations where there's been complete alienation, meaning there's no contact with the child.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. So I would love to hear if you, Kelly is asking who peer reviewed your study, Dr. Kruk. Now, Kelly, if you
Sure.
actually even look at all into Dr. Edward Kruk's study, he has published in a wide range of peer-reviewed journals, highly respected peer-reviewed journals. So it's not just one particular study. He has a range of publications. His work is very well respected. And it's not just Dr. Kruk. The peer-reviewed study in parental alienation is a very solid body of work in the number of years. So anyway, we're not going to go in and further getting distracted by this misinformation. So I'm going to respectfully ask that you stop that. And if not, I'm going to have to block you from this conversation. I do want other parents to have a voice. So we're going to continue. And so, like I said, other parents, if you wanted to share your situation, the alienating behaviors that you have experienced, I would love to. Sorry, I'm gonna have to remove Kelly from this conversation. Okay, all right. So let's stop that distraction. So okay, so back to the conversation. You mentioned earlier about that parental alienation is damaging to children. Could we talk more about or I don't know if you wanted to talk more about children behavior, like the five factor before we go into the impacts on the children. It's up to you.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, I've also had the experience. I'm just getting back to Kelly. I don't want to, uh, spend too much time on that. But yeah. I think we all, most academics try to publish in peer-reviewed journals, scientific journals. So, and perhaps you can be, published in a scientific journal without going through peer review. But we all kind of strive for peer review, of our work. And yeah, Meyer's work has been definitely, lacking in regard to, scientific rigor. There's been a critique published of her article, and she's never responded to that critique. So the one thing I would say is that I hate to kind of cut off someone like Kelly, but I invite all people who have a contrary, view on this to a discussion. For example, the International Council on Shared Parenting has an international conference in Athens in May, and we're begging for people who are against shared parenting, scientists especially, or those who may question the validity of parental alienation, to come and discuss it and debate it. Because yeah, we're a council on shared parenting, but we don't necessarily take a position except that of, is this in the best interest of the child? It's a child-focused, organization. So, please come out I've invited so many people, and I would definitely extend it, to the most fierce opponents, and let's discuss it in an open forum. So, yeah, but I could say a few more words about like the indicators of severe parental alienation,
Yes.
because I think some people may kind of, it's basically loving your, or rather, parental alienation is one of the manifestations is, hurting the other parent is more important than loving the child, because there's an obsession with that parent for some reason, and hurting the parent, and you forget about your parental responsibilities. That this is the alienating parent. Alienating parents are also like very willing and enthusiastic to engage in the courtroom in adversarial combat. They're really skilled, in the area, and they love it. They refuse to communicate in a negotiation process. Sure, they may come to mediation, for 1 or 2 sessions, but that's not their orientation. It's more of an adversarial orientation. Of course, there's people who alienate tend to blame the other 100% and their own, portion of responsibility for the bad situation is zero. They no responsibility for their own contribution to the problem situation or the conflict. They're 100%, in the right. The other one is in the wrong. It's very rare in any human interaction for there to be, 100-0, in terms of conflict. It's usually close to 50-50 responsibility, so it's a little bit distorted thinking in that regard. It seems readiness to accuse the other person of wrongdoing, but their own, they're saints themselves. They see themselves this way. Lack of remorse or guilt doesn't exist. You say, how can this person sleep with them? How can they sleep at night? and yes, they're perfectly able to sleep. The end justifies the means. It's okay. I believe the child is, I'm the superior parent. and by any means necessary kind of thing. So that's problematic. Bad mouthing the other parent constantly, avoiding any mention of the other parent, just erasure of the parent. And then constant interrogation of the child in regard to, or monitoring, I should say, of the child's relationship with the other parent, to the point that it, even if there is a little bit of contact, it's, very, very negative for the alienated parent. So I could go into the effects of parental alienation on children. If you want, I can talk a bit about that.
Please, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so there are a number of categories. There's a lot of research on how children have been affected, and it's a severe negative effect. As any form of violence against the child has, normally has severe impacts. But this one is unique because it teaches the child to hate themselves too. There's a lot of self-hatred attached to it, and guilt about, rejecting the parent, depression, poor self-esteem, and yeah, it's usually the child just kind of gives up. It's not, they may not be, they're like beyond children who are attention seeking or even power hungry, or wanting more power in their lives or whatever, or seeking revenge. A lot of them just become, inadequate in terms of how they, their social interactions, their academic performance, and kind of fade into the woodwork. That they don't stand out necessarily in the classroom as problematic. At least children who act out, are a bit spirited, but these are just very lonely, isolated, depressed children. A second area is disrupted social emotional development. So they're very, often very withdrawn, isolated, a tremendous amount of social anxiety. There are feelings of shame, betrayal by parents, lack of love. Yeah, they're basically unloved children. So you can imagine. Low self-sufficiency. So even though, there's this parentification of the child going on, but there's also infantilization going on. A lot of dependence on the parent because they're the only source of love. So you're desperate, and there's no love coming to them. But as they grow older, there's a lack of autonomy, low self-sufficiency or initiative. They kind of just drift along in life. And then there's also, in many cases, and I think there are a few gender differences, girls and boys may be a little bit different, but poor impulse control. So, for example, on the one hand, there'll be struggles with addiction and self-harm. On the other hand, being exploited by others, especially girls, and poor impulse control, you could call it, or just kind of having turning to drugs and alcohol and behavioral addictions, and being susceptible to harm. And finally, also there's very clear studies looking at academic performance, and we've known for a while that children who have no contact with a parent, have much lowered academic success and achievement than children not in that situation. So, but we do have a lot of research, or initially, a lot of the research, admittedly, is about children from father-absent homes. But the research has been done, on children in mother-absent homes, it's pretty much similar. These are, I can just cite a few, peer-reviewed studies. One is that alienated children 5 times more likely to have experienced emotional maltreatment and physical abuse. And they're 100 times have a higher risk of fatal abuse, where the outcome, they don't survive the abuse. They have a much higher risk of physical and mental health problems.
Wow.
And psychosomatic health symptoms, pain, chronic pain, asthma, diabetes, headaches, just feeling, generally health outcome, and also mental health outcomes. They're more likely to die as children, so they run greater mortality and morbidity risk. Over the lifespan, one study showed, this is back in 2003, that children where one parent is absent live an average of 4 years less over their lifespan. So, there are studies about sexual health, contracting sexually transmitted infections, and sexual abuse. Journal of Ethnology and Sociobiology actually had an article that reported that preschoolers who are estranged from their fathers, they're 40 times more likely to be sexually abused. That's the Journal of Ethnology and Sociobiology. So yeah, it's a really serious situation.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you actually highlighted not just the mental condition, but the fact that I think a lot of people overlook is that it actually translates into physical conditions as well. Like you mentioned, like asthma, etc., and then early death.
Yes.
Which is really important because a lot of people think that it's impacting children just on the invisible way, but it actually does manifest into a very physical, visible way. And then also someone in the chat room, I think, mentioned that the thing about you mentioned earlier about how does alienating parents sleep at night, and she said that's exactly what happened in her case. That the judge actually asked her ex about like, how do you sleep at night? So really, like it's the kind of thing that you just go like, how could somebody have so much hatred to do this to a child without caring? And then I do see the question from Maura, who I know her case, she mentioned in the chat that her case is actually diagnosed in court to be a severe case, and she's asking what is the solution? So like I mentioned in the second part of this conversation, we're going to go into the solution portion of it. So you talk about the impact on the children, and so what about the impact on the parents, the targeted parents? And I know you guys watching, how it's impacting you. I love to hear, you sharing your experience on this, but I'm sure that everything that Dr. Kruk is about to say is nothing surprising to you because it is what you are living with. So yeah, please.
Okay. So, I've been doing research in this area actually for, strange to say, over, 30 years, starting in 1985. I wanted to know why so many non-resident, non-custodial, they were called, fathers lost contact with their children. I then did a study of non-custodial mothers too. So, and I found that these parents suffer a grief reaction containing all the major elements of a bereavement. So, there's initial shock. It's that classic, Kubler-Ross framework, then a lot of anger, a sense of learned helplessness and depression, and just being stuck in that grief. And then, 30 years after I did my original study, I did a replication thinking, well, now we have more shared parenting, perhaps there'll be, fewer problems. But I found that the situation for parents who were excluded from who were alienated, that alienation is still happening as much if not more than ever, sadly. But the effects are compounded now because fathers especially are much more involved in their children's lives than they were perhaps, they're it's a much more, this idea of a new father, of a contemporary father, is highly involved, attached to his children, and very influential in their development. They're much more active, and in fact, that is the case because this full-scale grief reaction I talked about actually now had morphed into a post-traumatic stress situation for fathers. Full-blown trauma situation. So that rendered them all the more debilitated. And this is definitely connected directly to, their relationship with their children, the absence of their children, and the loss of their role as a parent. So, we talk about a suicide there. Another study, very shocking statistic, that the most at-risk group of parents, the most at-risk group of human beings, actually, in terms of serious depression and suicide, are parents who have children under 18 years of age with whom they have no contact. So these are the alienated parents, and it's such a large group. So suicide risk is definitely shockingly high. And the interesting thing too to me is that it's not just a form of individual abuse, parental alienation. It's a form of collective, excuse me, a form of both collective child abuse, but also collective family violence against the parent, because a judge basically does not award custody or parenting time or whatever. They actually remove a loving parent from the life of a child. They actually remove custody from a parent. That's what they're doing. When there is a viable alternative like equal shared parenting. But they basically remove a parent from the life of the child and put that child at risk, put the parent at serious risk. And generally, tragic outcomes sometimes occur. It's and then in the alienation situations, it is a form of family violence, just as physical abuse is. And both men and women are equally capable to be perpetrators or victims, on the other hand. And yet, it's a form of child abuse. And yet, what is the law doing? What's the law doing about family violence in general? They're basically not prosecuting this as a criminal law matter, family violence I'm talking about, but they leave it to the family courts to deal with. But the family court judges aren't either, they're not trained, they don't have the fact finding and investigation necessary to determine whether or not there's been a criminal form of or any of family violence, basically. And parental alienation is family violence, and family violence is criminal behavior. So why aren't the courts doing anything about that? But they're very happy to play God when it comes to removing a parent from the life of a child, a vulnerable child in many cases. So it's a form of collective family violence and child abuse by those who work in that adversarial mode, that adversarial system, and in the shadow of the adversarial system. I can't stress that enough. Yeah, I would leave it at that then. And
Thank you. So you're talking about the system failure, not just the alienated, but how the alienators are being employed by a system that failed to protect the abused children. And I do want to acknowledge
systemic violence.
Right, systemic violence. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do want to acknowledge in the chat room, we have Kurt that said you are so correct, doctor. And Rebecca said this is like living death. We got Rebecca said perpetual grief. Dinah said, definitely
Living death. Yeah.
PTSD, the feeling of hopelessness, not wanting to be in a relationship. Someone else said suicidal thoughts often.
Yeah.
Uh, Someone else said contemplating cell unaliving every year. Yeah, thank you so much. And I know Pradek and some other people, I know there's some misunderstanding about 50-50 shared parenting. We will go into that later and clarify that. So we'll talk about that. Please just hold off for a moment because there's a misunderstanding there. It's not what you think. Trust me on this. Okay, I do see Mara said PTSD from alienation. There's days that I just want to die. I wouldn't, but I wouldn't leave my little girl. Yeah, someone else said more things, abuse by proxy. Someone else exactly what the judge did to myself. Someone said don't even wish this horrific pain on the alienators themselves. Someone else said definitely criminal behavior. Yeah, someone said me too, I can relate. Really, like I mentioned before, I know that you guys experience this is a visceral experience that you guys are living every day, and this is not something that you can say PTSD. PTSD is post-trauma. What you are
Yeah.
living is
They're living through it. Yeah. Sorry, it's a trauma that's never resolved. It's a grief that's never resolved.
yeah, it's an
You know,
ongoing
when
abuse.
yeah, and you use the word visceral, I think that's a good one. And this living death, I've heard that a lot. And a lot of parents, describe it as a primal wound. It's really, yeah, very profound and just pure hell for people.
Right. Yeah, and then yeah, so Claudia and Brandon said, yeah, it's complex PTSD. Yes, that's a closer way of describing
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then
it
we
is. Yes, it is complex.
right in
PTSD. Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, so we see a lot of these that you guys definitely relate and you understand this. So I do wanted to go back to the earlier mention about how, yeah, and then someone said this is pure health, it's piece of me that taken away. Yeah, so earlier and we talk a lot about the impact on the children and the target parents, and you said that it's family violence and child abuse. I do wanted to kind of go a little bit more technical. Now, what are the criteria for something to be considered child abuse? I mean, we do understand that this is impacting on the children, but at what point does it, what are the factors for it to become child abuse?
Okay. Two factors, basically. Okay. Child abuse is attributed to human agency, is how they define it. Okay. That somebody actually that is committing. There's a human involved,
There's a
perpetuating
perpetrator.
violence.
There's a
Yeah,
perpetrator.
perpetrator. Yeah, and secondly, it's a significant form of harm to children. Child abuse is okay. Significant form of harm. There have been lots of debates. How do you define child abuse, etc.? But basically, almost everyone agrees. It's number one, its occurrence is attributed to human agency, and secondly, it's a significant form of harm of children. So, if you look at the very definition of parental alienation, one, it involves a set of abusive strategies on the part of a father or a mother to foster the child's rejection of the other parent, where the children are manipulated to hate that other parent. It's all these abusive strategies I've mentioned. And secondly, its negative effects are serious and debilitating to children. It's a serious mental and disturbance with physical effects. It's based on false belief, false memories, just that the alienated parent is dangerous and unworthy. So, and then all those effects that I mentioned, depression, suicide rates, the self-hatred of alienated children, their isolation, their social, emotional, physical, mental functioning are all affected. in a very negative way. So that you have that, attributed to human agency, a significant form of harm to children, and I think it meets those basic criteria of definition of child abuse. Now, if you're going to classify parental alienation as what type of child abuse, mainly, it's a form of emotional child abuse. But at the same time, it's linked to severe neglect of children. A lot of alienated children are just neglected because the parent is tuned out, not really thinking about the child. Secondly, physical abuse. People who are emotionally violent tend to be physically violent also. And yeah, even sexual abuse. I've mentioned the vulnerability of children who are alienated in regard to sexual abuse. So these are all related to, but the Child Protection Authority does have an important role to play here. And I think most, I would I would go out on a limb and say most child protection workers consider parental alienation as a form of abuse and emotional abuse. But because it's sort of classified as emotional abuse, often child protection agencies, or typically child protection agencies, don't get involved. Because they would argue, well, emotional abuse is impossible to prove in court. So we just don't deal with those cases. Physical and sexual, it's clear, or severe neglect, or neglect. But emotional abuse, yeah, no, we've got limited resources. We don't get involved, in these cases. So, again, we pass the buck, or, just are unresponsive to the needs of children. Yeah, in the child protection sphere. Now, because there was such an outcry in my own state of British Columbia, Canada, about this, they appointed a child and youth officer, or a representative, a legal, a person who actually they think, well, probably a legal person would be best. A poor choice, I thought, because I think there are specialists in child development that are typically they're not in the legal arena. But anyway, Mary Ellen Terfel Lafond was appointed in that role. My understanding is that, alienated parents were desperate for help and called the child and youth representative in British Columbia ceaselessly. And most of the calls were about that. But that person chose not to become involved in the arena of parental alienation. Again, they're adopting that ideology that parental alienation is some kind of father's rights conspiracy. So yeah, I can, point to several such examples.
Actually, yeah, when you're talking about system failure, like the example that you just mentioned, we see it so widespread. So, for example, and I know like Claudia's in the chat room right now, and she's very familiar with this. Claudia and I have been working on so many things together. And one of the things, for example, the Children Commission in Texas, which is it's a federal body, the federally funded body in the state level. And their role is to educate judges and commissioners on child abuse, child welfare issues. And then when we talk to them about parental alienation, they go, oh, we refuse to address whether that's child abuse or not. Now, how can you assist and educate judges and commissioners on children welfare issues if you don't recognize parental alienation is a form of child abuse? It's either a form of child abuse and you are neglecting in helping the judges and court to protect these abused children, or you denying that it's child abuse. It's either one of those things.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. I completely
right, and
agree.
it's so frustrating. And then not to mention, so you mentioned earlier about why is it not a criminal matter? In fact, there are portion of parental alienation is already in the penal code. So for example, custody interference, that is when you have a court order that said this is the time that you have your child, and then the other parent blatantly violate that court order and refuse to bring the child or allowing the child to go, that is child it's a child interference of child custody. And in the US, I don't know about Canada, but in the US, almost it's really all the state, it's actually in the penal code, that's actually a criminal matter. But
Yeah.
still, even though it's written clearly as a criminal matter, but the police and the district attorney office refuse to actually enforce this law. So, it's not just about not recognizing it as a criminal matter. It's recognized. There's a piece of it that already been recognized as a criminal matter, and they still not enforcing it. So talking about system failure at all levels in so many facets.
Well, I think we have to be vocal about this state of affairs and be vocal that this is are we a child-hating society? I think so. I think I would describe it. I think, I've heard that just, our society described that way by some commentators. And, this is definitely, a clear indication that we are, a child-hating society. There's such indifference, turning away from, a lot of rhetoric. We go on and on and on about rights and children's rights, but rights are kind of useless in and of themselves unless somebody takes responsibility that children are protected. So, child protection agencies, judges, all the social institutions, which, by the way, I think, we don't say enough about the responsibility of representatives of social institutions like the courts, the, child welfare system. It's their responsibility to support parents in the fulfillment of their responsibilities to their children's needs. We actually do the opposite. We undermine parents, by taking one parent away, in a custody dispute, rather than helping them work through the logistics of an equal parenting arrangement. We see in child protection services even, an orientation of removal of a child. Sometimes it's, very necessary, but where are the supports to alienating parents? Not only alienated, but those who are alienating, to support them as, caring and loving and responsible parents. Be more responsive to your children's needs. So really, yeah, we're it's not just a disservice to children and families, but it's a total lack of responsibility, assuming responsibility. Talk about rights nonstop, but nobody takes responsibility.
Thank you. Earlier, I saw a question from Selma. And by the way, thank you, Selma, for having been a supporter of our program financially on Patreon for quite a while now. So thank you so much, Selma. So earlier, Selma mentioned asking a question, like you were talking about the impact of parental alienation on children. And her question is there a difference between a child that was alienated when the child was very young versus a child that was alienated in their early adulthood? Did you see the difference in the impact?
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting question.
That's such an interesting, question indeed, because so few people have, very few, if any, people have done any in-depth research on it. I think there's been an assumption that the younger the child, the more negatively affected. But we have lots of evidence that children of different ages and stages of development are affected, but in very different ways, and their needs are quite different. But yeah, that also points to the reality that older children too can be alienated, despite having a good relationship with both with the now alienated parent. I think I would say that the state of of knowledge in this area today is that children of all ages are affected, but in different ways, and they have different needs as far as intervention is concerned. But they all seem to have a secret yearning to reconnect with the now alienated parent, but they never even go there in their minds or in any kind of action or discussions. It's kind of a taboo subject with the alienating parent. But if there is intervention available that can, reconnect them, that they usually respond in a positive way when they're away from the toxic influence of the alienating parent. And but then when they're back under that influence, then they tend to be alienated again and disengage again.
Right, right. I felt like when the children are older, by the time they got alienated, I feel like you have actually a better chance of reversing it because at least the child
Mhm.
has a clearer memory of,
Yeah,
your
yeah.
prior relationship with the child.
Mhm, mhm.
If the child
Yeah,
is too young, it's much harder to
yeah.
have this solid history where you can
Mhm,
trigger back these, like try to pull these triggers of memory back. Um,
mhm.
yeah, so I
Yeah,
mean, again, this is not research. This is just my perception of it, just
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
thinking through it.
And my own research has focused mainly on younger children, well, right up to adolescence, but typically, more often younger children.
Right. And then the other aspect that you mentioned about how CPS is not recognizing this because they're looking at this as, oh, this is emotional abuse and we're not handling it. And
Mhm,
it's not just CPS. I think we as a society, because if we don't see a black eyes or a broken ribs or, bruises, or if we don't hear screaming,
mhm,
somehow we're not able to recognize the pain behind it. And the problem is when you're looking at physical or even sexual abuse, really the biggest like impact of those abuse is actually the psychological abuse because the bruises can heal, but really the impact behind it, like the psychological abuse on the victims, is what's going to cause much more lasting impact. But we as a society, I think, fail to recognize it because we just don't know how to see it. We don't know how to appreciate it, unfortunately.
mhm.
Um, and I see in the chat a bunch of comments about so Amy says CPS is a joke, they are not trained, they are clueless. I also see comment I think earlier by Dr. Someone I forgot that mentioned that CPS is involved in children trafficking. Yeah, I mean CPS is a whole another
Yeah,
can of worm.
whole other, yeah, kind of worms kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, yesterday I kind of touched on it a little bit, lack of resources, lack of education, the motivation and the incentive is misaligned, and there's just so many problems with them, really.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's a whole system too, yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned it either. I worked for 30 years. I've just finally left the university, as a teaching prof. I'm still doing research, but I was in a school of social work for 30 years. And, I would say, based on that experience, that schools of social work really need to be held accountable um, in regard to training of child and family social workers, because they're not doing a great job by any means. Um, and and there are graduating social workers that really have no knowledge of something like parental alienation, for example. So yeah, that's an issue, that's a little more complex than just improving the training of social workers. That there are um, because we don't prioritize children and families, in terms of social policies. Um, the resources, the lack of resources in child protection services is really quite alarming. So this is a system that needs a complete overhaul, clearly, because it's not meeting the needs of parents and their children. And they're more adversarial than they should be. They're clearly not focused on supporting parents to be responsible and responsive to their children's needs. So yeah, I could definitely talk a lot about that, but just the recognition of parental alienation as individual abuse makes it a very serious child protection concern that warrants the intervention of child protection authorities. So, you know, at the very least, in this arena, there's urgency, that there's recognition of parental alienation as a specific form of child abuse, and it warrants a child protection response, and, you know, an effective response, and, you know, timely response, and with a comprehensive assessment and investigation.
Thank you. I do want to touch back the point earlier that I do see a little bit of a misunderstanding in the chat room regarding 50-50 share, equal share parenting. Now, I know that you are a strong advocate for equal share parenting. However, when it comes to situation of severe parental alienation, clearly equal share parenting doesn't work. So if you could please clarify like your stand on it, and you know why you think it's work or when it doesn't work.
Yeah. So although to me it seems counterintuitive to remove a parent from a child's life, you know, to deal with, you know, forced removal of the other parent, right? You're reconnecting the child with the alienated parent. And often the only way you can actually do that is by removing the toxic influence of the alienating parent. Okay, so I'm a very strong, you know, advocate, having, you know, studied this continually for, you know, 30 years plus. I'm a staunch supporter of shared parenting as a legal presumption in family law, that should be the norm. And when people can't agree on parenting arrangements, then, you know, there's no need for the court to be involved. Just have a law saying that there's equal 50-50 time division, and that there are family relationship centers and support services to help people work through the logistics of a equal parenting arrangement, including the time schedule and other considerations, decision-making aspects. So, you know, absolutely staunch supporter of a legal presumption of shared parenting, but there's no, you know, there is a legal presumption is always rebuttable, and you have to be very clear in which cases it doesn't apply. So basically, I think there's really only, you know, one primary reason for denying a parent equal parenting responsibility and time with children, and that is actually child abuse. Now, if you're involved in family violence and you're violating a parent, an abuse of a parent, that's actually also a form of child abuse, because children witnessing parental abuse is a form of child abuse. So when there is child abuse, the severe cases, you remove the child, you remove the parent from the child's life. The safety of the child is always paramount. So parental alienation is a form of both family violence and child abuse. So in those cases, there has to be child protection intervention and a decision made. Do you remove the toxic parent, or can you work with that toxic parent to support them to be responsive to their children's needs for both parents in their lives, and to, you know, and to recognize that what they're doing as alienators is a form of child abuse, taking responsibility for it, admitting it, and then working to support the other parent in the child's life. Then, okay, you know, that's a less intrusive form of intervention, child protection intervention, than removing the child, removing the parent from the child's life. But I think in the extreme cases, yes, it's the child's safety is paramount. So you remove the parent, the abusive parent from the child's life, the alienating parent from the child's life. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so what you're advocating for is for equal share parenting when you have fit parents, both
Yeah.
parents are fit parents.
Yeah.
But when you
Yes.
have a situation of an abusive parent, whether it's physical or whether it's
Yeah.
emotional, such as
Correct.
parental alienation, you do not support 50-50. So I do want to clarify this because I think there's
Okay.
a misunderstanding in the
Yes,
chat room.
absolutely. Yeah. That's correct. Yeah, you put
Right.
it
And then the
well.
other thing too is I saw Pradek question, and I think there's also a misunderstanding that he or her question is that is this professor going to address based on which studies he concluded that most broken families have both parents to equally or approximately equally blame for the situation. I don't think Dr. Kruk ever said that in most of the broken families, both parents are equally blamed for the situation. I think this is a misunderstanding. Do you want to clarify that, Dr. Kruk?
Yeah. Okay. So I did say in most lots of, I could, I don't use the term broken families, but also no, I that's not something I would agree with. That in parental alienation situations, it's 50-50 blame. No, I'm saying when a parent is saying it is 100-0, the other parent is 100% to blame and I'm 0% to blame, that's kind of a sign that, maybe your thinking is a little distorted and you're using that as a justification to remove the other parent, alienate the other parent. So that's problematic. I'm saying most human conflicts, including family violence, most family violence is reciprocal violence. It's not the man against the woman or the woman against the man. It's reciprocal. So it's closer to 50-50 for sure than it is 100-0, responsibility. So, we should all look at our part in conflicts, and accept, no, it's never the case that one person is 100% to blame and the other person is a saint. So, we should all look at our own, the role that we've played in the conflict. But that said, parental alienation there can be dual, and we don't talk about that enough, both parents kind of alienating, but typically it's one parent who has, actually acted on that impulse to, destroy the relationship between the child and the parent. And it's usually one parent that's, primarily responsible. Although I think there's much more kind of dual, mutual alienation going on than we want to recognize. Human beings have this, tendency to, really find fault and put full blame on the other party. But in reality, both have some part to play. It may not be equal though. And in alienation situations, it's usually one person being the alienator and keeping the child away from the other parent.
Right. Also, I wanted to clarify in terms of, just in case anyone have any other sort of confusion about what was said earlier, is that what we were trying to say that this is not a gender issue, meaning that it can happen to both mothers, it can happen to fathers, it can be caused by mothers or it can be caused by fathers. That's what we meant. We're not trying to say that both parents in all the cases are equally responsible. There's cases where it's the father that the cause, there are cases where the mothers are the cause, there's cases where it's not a gender issue.
But one other point in regard to that, it's much more often the legal custodial parent who's been given, preferential treatment basically as a parent and has the power to alienate, that is the alienator. And, in certain jurisdictions, fathers are the sort of non-resident fathers, so-called, or non-custodial, or the father who is the visiting parent. and they're much more at risk. But when the mother is the visiting parent, she's much more at risk. So, we've had some courts decide, well, oh, maybe we have an imbalance here of, children living, orders that remove the father from the child's life as a daily parent. Let's deal with that imbalance by removing more mothers or whatever. So, they're equally capable, mothers and fathers, to alienate, and also equally likely to be victimized, but in jurisdictions where maternal custody or preference is given to mothers, as far as living arrangements of children are concerned, then fathers are more at risk, and vice versa. I've actually been to countries where there is a paternal preference, where children are automatically awarded to fathers, and a new partner comes into the scene, and the stepmother takes over the role of mother. So it's the opposite there in terms of who's doing the alienating. But parents are equally, just as they're equally likely of abuse, they're equally like of family violence and just abuse generally. They're equally likely, they're equally capable of being alienating parents.
Thank you. So let's go into the second part of the conversation, which is about the solution. You propose these 4 pillars of solution to deal with parental alienation. So yeah, please.
Okay, yeah, I'll talk a bit about that then. So parental alienation is kind of a multi-layered problem. And it calls for a multifaceted kind of approach. There's no one panacea or simple solution, although we don't want to make it, so complex that it's unwieldy. But I think there are like 4 what I would call pillars or stages, or four points of intervention. And I've mentioned a few of these already. The first being that we recognize parental alienation as a form of family violence, of spousal abuse, or partner violence, partner abuse. And family violence is a criminal matter, and a criminal act. When you look at the behaviors toward the parent, they're extremely violent. Psychologically, there's sometimes physical abuse of the other parent, but it's more a form of severe psychological abuse, in which the court system is often kind of co-opted or part of. There's legal abuse, administrative abuse. These have been detailed in research papers, the many different forms of violence that are present in parental alienation situations. So it makes it a criminal justice matter, and there should be a criminal justice response. You have to protect the abused party, there's been a form of violence here, an assault, and it should be prosecuted as such, just as you would violence against women. Specifically, it's a form of violence against women, but it's also a form of violence against men, and we should take it more seriously. The criminal court hasn't had a great track record in regard to violence against women, so it has an even worse track record in regard to prosecuting situations of parental alienation where one parent ends up dead. For example, suicide rates are so high. So second pillar would be what I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, was recognizing parental alienation as a child protection issue. It's a form of child abuse, and not just emotional, but it has those other physical and emotional and elements. In addition to this being like direct abuse of children, it's also in regard to emotional abuse, it also has this component where children are party to the abuse. They're forced to be abusers themselves in regard to hating the other parent and trying to harm the other parent along with the alienating parent. So they're complicit in that whole process, and as such, they're not just witnessing family violence, witnessing the abuse of a parent by the other parent, which is a form of child abuse, just that witnessing, but here they're actually being conscripted and involved in the abuse. So child protection response is the second pillar. And then I would say there's just the remaining pillars relate to prevention and treatment. So prevention, first of all, the best way to address, I've said this, many times, the best way to address parental alienation in our society is to establish a rebuttable legal presumption of equal shared parenting. Make shared parenting the foundation of family law. Those countries and states which have shared parenting as the norm, or like Sweden, it's just an expectation in Sweden that people are going to equally share. Nobody goes to court. Judges and lawyers are not employed in that field because that's just the way the society runs, which I think is the healthiest for children. Their outcomes for their kids are amazing. Their children and youth of separated families are doing just as well, if not better, than children in intact two-parent families because of this sort of legal expectation. So why do we have courts at all? We don't need them. Just establish equal shared parenting as the foundation of family law, rebuttable in situations of family violence or child abuse. And then the final pillar is treatment of parental alienation, which include reunification programs, but also therapeutic services to children, parents, and the family system as a whole, and culturally specific services also. So, we have such a diversity of families, so we need a broad array of services, publicly funded, because come on, we need, more support for children and families. So Australia was able to do this by establishing a countrywide network of what they called family relationship centers that were set up to coincide with the new shared parenting law there, where there were, psychologists and other helping professionals, a wide range of professionals available. One of their key, two of their key services were offering mediation, therapeutic family mediation programs aimed at facilitating the development of shared parenting plans. So, we can't expect people just to shared parenting just like that with no support. It's vital to have those support services in the background. So, but I also, part of this, I include support services and psychological support to targeted alienated parents, because they are going through a grief reaction. They're going through an extremely difficult stress situation of stress, and their parenting has been, really not, they're parenting under duress, and they'll continue to parent under duress. So they need supports. I always tell, alienated parents to never give up, despite how bleak the situation looks, and despite, all those years of just having your heart rendered asunder kind of thing. And despite the pain and despite the lack of hope and learned helplessness, you have to kind of hang in there and just have that, and despite, your child's very abusive, behavior, that's a really hard, difficult thing to deal with. But never ever give up, I think, is really key. It's easy to say, much easier to say than done, but those therapeutic supports need to be in place for alienated children, parents, individual, support, family support, extended family support. And, quite often a child has a much broader array of primary caregiving people in their lives, including extended family members, including grandparents, of course. So don't exclude them as part of the equation. In mediation programs, quite often they're really good resources for children to overcome, that trauma of parental alienation, and for the whole family to establish a situation where children's loving relationships are protected and really supported.
Thank you so much. Earlier you mentioned about the children playing the role of not just watching what is being done to them and to the targeted parents, but the children are being pulled and pushed into the role of the active abusers themselves. And I know, like, for example, in the chat room, Rebecca said, yes, in order to survive, the children, in order to survive, they actually turn into the abuser. And I know many of the parents experience children not just being defiant, being cold and rude and rejecting them. Some children turn violent. Some children play the role of spies. I know many of you experience this yourself. I think I saw some other comment in the chat. Yeah, I've seen parents where they said, what do I do? Because my children turned physically violent to me. Like, parents, it's crazy. Like, seeing your children from this loving, vulnerable, beautiful children turn into this cold, defiant, and difficult children, and then turn into this monster that is the mimic of this narcissistic, personality disorder alienators, and then turn into this physically abusive children. It's a heartbreaking situation for parents. And then the other things that you mentioned too is that you said about the resources, and this is something that it's really crazy to me, is that when you're looking at any type of really you look at any kind of groups where, for example, you have the suicidal hotline, you have the domestic violence group, the domestic violence hotline, you have all this, you have gay and lesbians support group and all that kind of things. But when it comes to alienation, there's no resources whatsoever from the system. There's no funding, there's no hotlines, there's no shelters. Alienated parents have nowhere to go, there's nowhere to call, there's nothing out there. And I think it starts from the point of what you said earlier, is the lack of recognition that this is domestic violence, this is child abuse, this is criminal matter. It starts from there. So the system failed from there, and because of that, they refuse to provide resources for this mass amount of victims.
Yes. So true. Some years ago, I kind of looked at the whole question of the disengagement of parents from the lives of children in our society more generally, not just because of alienation, but also, in child protection, for example. In Canada, we have only 5% of children are First Nations or Indigenous children, but over 50% are in foster care, not because of abuse, but because the standards of living, their kind of lifestyle and standard of living didn't coincide with what middle-class white social workers saw were, it was appropriate, as in their words. So, rather than families being supported, kept together and being supported, when there are neglect or or maltreatment issues, they're being removed. Childcare policy, we in Canada have a national, we give millions and millions of dollars to, third-party care of children, in the form of institutionalized daycare programs, which some parents benefit from, but a lot of parents would like to spend more time with their kids. They get very little, if anything. So, even in childcare policy, it's not supportive of parental involvement in children's lives. So we've seen like a massive decline in the amount of time that parents are spending with their children. In Canada, the recent study found that over 10 years, parents have 33% less time in their children's lives than they did 10 years ago, like being physically present, so in so many arenas. Yeah, we're not a child-loving society. You could say we're child-hating, and we're, society. We're certainly not a society that supports parents just across the board. But this really, is a life and death matter with alienated parents. The lack of support services. It's shocking. And yes, begin with this is a criminal matter and a child protection matter. And urgent action is absolutely needed.
Right. And then the other point that I thought was really important that you kind of mentioned that is that I think it's really important for us to recognize that targeted parents and children are the victim of this and they suffer, but it's also actually it's impacted the whole half of that, the targeted families, the grandparents, the siblings, all this extended family. And I think it's important to recognize that they are also a part of this equation and they are also victims and their suffering is also tremendous. It's really important to recognize that. I wanted to ask you about, this is a very, very common and unfortunately effective way that alienators use is to have the false allegation of child abuse against targeted parents, and in order to use the court and the system to empower their alienation. So do you have any advice on how to address this issue of false allegation of child abuse, sexual and physical abuse or neglect?
So, you have not only false allegations, but false denials of abuse. Okay, they're equally bad, and equally kind of prevalent. And it could often be going on at the same time. Someone who is alleging abuse is actually the abuser, and deny, just kind of dismissing. How could I, again, it just speaks to the importance of having a well-trained and informed child protection service in society, and also beefing up criminal prosecution of, false allegation is a type of alienation. It's serving the alienation. You want the other parent removed from the child's life. So it's thoroughly investigated. Now, if it's not substantiated, then you want to look at this more carefully. The role of the accuser, kind of thing. And it is and that there be a more thorough investigation of parental alienation as an issue of concern. But we have those kind of indicators of alienation that Amy Baker developed and others have developed. I sometimes wonder, why are we so why do we feel so ill-equipped when it comes to diagnosing parental alienation? You look at the actions of the alienator, and do they fit that profile, those categories of behaviors? And if they do, it seems it's clear that alienation is going on. So this is both criminal investigators, but also particularly in the field of child protection, you want to be well versed. We have a lack of trained personnel in this area, to assess and investigate and also intervene. We need more parental alienation specialists, clearly. It's shocking what now it's improving tremendously in the last few years. There's more recognition, among professionals that of the seriousness, the reality, first of all, of parental alienation and the seriousness in regard to the impact. But there's a lot of bystanders out there, both public and professional bystanders. They're not, they're okay with working in the shadow of the law. For example, you've got a system, there's systemic abuse going on, and you're working within that, and you're quite, okay working within that. More of a sustained critique of systemic abuse, but also the lack of law reform, lack of humane and family focused and child focused services to support children and families. Right across the board, I guess. We're not providing the programs and services that are so vitally needed.
Thank you. And I saw in the chat room, Predex said that professor is absolutely correct. Urgent action is needed indeed, and it's overdue. And I saw Rebecca said alienated parents pay more child support. Yeah, because they don't have access to their children, may mean that they have less time, mean that they're responsible for more.
That's an incentive. That's another incentive for alienation. Child support system creates alienators and alienated children and parents.
Right, that's another huge can of worms again.
It's a huge system. So many people living off the avails of the child support system.
Right.
Interesting that people are in such cases are very fine with present structure, not addressing wage differentials, things like this. But they feel that it's quite legitimate to have one parent removed from the child's life involuntarily and forced to contribute to the alienation through child support, so-called. The money doesn't go to, why is it called child support? It goes to the alienator, not to the child.
Right. And then while they have to work more, that means they have less time to advocate for themselves and for the children. And that's what Rebecca was saying. And it's so true, because really everything is stacked against alienated parents in so many ways. And earlier you mentioned about the false allegation. It's the problem is that, okay, you have all these false allegation, and not only is not being investigated properly most of the time, and it's just taken at face value. So targeted parents being targeted with this false allegation and never have a chance to clear their name. But if they did have a chance to clear their name, it just go, oh, I guess it's not abuse. But then the accuser is never being held accountable for this false allegation.
Yes. Yeah. Well, of course. Yeah. One must be held accountable. Yeah. Well, there is much that needs to be reformed in the present situation. One is a recognition that family violence is not just, violence against women. It's most violence is reciprocal, but there's more. There's just as likely to be, mothers. There's women are just as likely to be violent as men. It's just not generally understood that way. Family violence. We tend to look at it in a very biased way, the gender paradigm way. So it's not a gender-based issue, and yes, stop regarding it as a gender kind of based issue, and hold those who, it's a form of, at the very least, mischief legally, to make a false allegation. But one has to be, false allegations within the present adversarial system are commonplace, encouraged, the norm. And that's why the legal and judicial systems really are not, good for the determination of living arrangements of children after separation, because of these kinds of tactics, abusive tactics. Again, a form of collective abuse.
Thank you. So we talk a lot about different aspects of why the system failed. We talk about, the lack of education and knowledge. We're talking about the misincentive in terms of, for example, the child support system. We talk about, all this stuff. But I think there's one big part of this also that we haven't touched on a lot is we are working against this whole, I guess, movement of misinformation against parental alienation victims and parental alienation advocates. I wonder if we could talk more about that. Why is these people that are parental alienation deniers? They deny that parental alienation is real, and they deny that this is a serious child protection matter that it needs, and that victims deserve to get solutions. These people spread misinformation. I mean, even right at the beginning of this conversation, we have people in the chat room that trying to say that all of this is invalid, and there's people denying that they say parental alienation is pseudoscience. I wonder if you could comment on why are they doing this, and why are they like what is wrong with this picture? Because we're not just failing because the system doesn't have enough resources or the system doesn't understand. On top of that, we have these people that are going completely against us with the spreading of misinformation and disinformation.
Yeah. So I haven't really considered this as much as I would like to, but definitely I think the key is accountability, the lack of accountability of people who are spreading, first of all. The ones who kind of, those who originate these ideas and spread and sort of put out junk science, I would call it, or pseudoscience, who never participate in any kind of forum in which their ideas are tested. They don't go through a peer review process. They don't attend conferences to which they're invited, by the way. Joan Meyer, I would say, I would, extend the warmest invitation to come and speak at the International Council on Shared Parenting. We had one occasion where, someone who just outright did not believe in parental alienation came to our conference and presented. She just said, stated the case that this is a father's rights conspiracy, and all women, the only basically women are the ones who are abused, and she was in a panel and kind of presented that, but could not provide any hard scientific data whatsoever. But that was such a rare occurrence, and she wouldn't come back a second time, although she was treated very well, extremely, at the conference, and respectfully. But yeah, they won't come out, and they won't hold themselves accountable. We need to hold them accountable. And why are the media so misinformed in regard to, there are standards to assess whether this is a valid scientific and credible, scientifically credible argument. Has this been peer reviewed, for example? Do your research. My God, the media, the reporters aren't actually doing the research needed to the background research to kind of tell them, is this a recognized study or not? So I think accountability all around, from and why are the judiciary not acting in any way in regard to holding people who falsely allege accountable? Well, it's part of the system. It's the norm. They kind of overlook that. Again, they're bystanders at best, and active participants in that at worst.
Thank you. I saw in the chat room you mentioned about why the media is so misled and so like participating, the spreading in the misinformation. I saw in the chat room Rod is talking about how his accuser would never face any consequences for the false claim. So the
Right.
false claim against him made the news. But once he
Yeah.
cleared his name and
There was
he was
nothing.
found innocent,
Yeah.
there was
Yeah.
never anything published. And
Yeah.
unfortunately for Rod's case, when he finally cleared his name and got custody, the
Yeah.
alienator, who is a mother,
Yeah.
killed the child and killed herself.
Oh,
It's a tragic situation. And we
yeah.
did an
Yeah.
interview with Rod. If you guys haven't seen the case, like you can look into the videos tab of Victim to Hero Facebook page and you will find that interview. And it's a tragic situation. The system failed over and over again. And eventually it get to a point where really, he cleared his name and still like talking about the everything is stacking against the targeted parent, and at the end of the day you did everything right, you did everything you could, and you supposedly got your child back, and then you lost everything.
Yeah.
Like talking about the system, just massive failure.
I don't think
um
we can dismiss, the vested interests of, the divorce industry and the kind of law industry and those who have amassed power in this system and are really benefiting, not just benefiting, but they're yeah, it's battening on, the blood of children and families. Basically, it's making yourself, this fat cat. It's a multi-million billion-dollar industry worldwide to perpetuate adversarial conflict, among people who haven't got their act together and are kind of vulnerable, to lawyers to prey on, and the judicial system to just perpetuate the conflict when there's a viable alternative. So, who are the vested interest groups here?
right. I actually had a private conversation with how do you call it? Somebody that is working in the system and wanted to stay anonymous and wanted to share with me the information. This person is from Colorado, and she actually showed me some data. And really, just in Colorado alone, is like $7 billion every year. The industry is benefiting from the targeted parents. It's crazy. So you're talking about just one state alone.
Yeah.
And we're talking about like worldwide, this is a problem. So
Yes.
yeah, it's very tragic. I know I've been holding you for a long time, and there's a lot of more questions that we can't sort of like go into in the chat room. I wanted to see, is there anything else that you wanted to add before we go?
Yeah. Well, it's a real measure of, of society, the degree to which, children and families are honored and supported. Sorry, I'm not used to 2 hour long.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. But yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to add. I think your comments have been really instructive, and the questions have been great, and thanks for the opportunity. But I would say, it's always been my sort of, I'm not anti-rights kind of thing per se, but I think the more we talk about, parental rights, children's rights, whatever, we kind of lose sight of responsibilities. And I really firmly believe that it's the responsibility of parents to be there for their children, both parents, and it's the responsibility of society and our institutions to support parents being there, to be receptive and responsive to their children's needs. Don't undermine parents, support them. What we expect of people, they endeavor to provide. If we expect them to be adversaries in the legal setting and denigrate each other to prove who's the better parent, that's exactly what they'll do. But if we expect them to cooperate to the benefit of their children and take responsibility, equal responsibility for their care and upbringing, then that's what they'll do. It kind of begins with the social institutions, so supporting parents in the fulfillment of their parental responsibilities to children's needs.
Thank you so much. Please don't go. Please stay, Dr. Kruk.
Sure.
Please stay.
Yeah.
I do wanted to highlight something that Dr. Kruk mentioned earlier, which is don't give up. That's a message that I really want you guys to hold on to and walk away with, despite everything that you are going through. I understand. I do. I'm not saying it as a face value. I understand your pain. I know what you're going through, and it's a lot. Everything is stacking against you, but please don't give up. Hold on to that conviction, because that conviction is so important. There's nothing that can fight against that boundless love that you have for your children. Nobody can take that away from you. Everything can happen around you, everything can happen to you, but nothing can take away that love that you have for your children. So don't give up on your children, and hold on to that conviction that you're going to be able to get your children back and be able to protect your children. So really, don't give up. Thank you so much for being here today. Please like this video, please help sharing this video, and if you have more questions, please feel free to put in the comments, and then I will try to share this video with Dr. Kruk, and then he can check it later. If there's something that he can help addressing, he will, and then we'll follow up with you guys. If there's something that a lot of people asking, then we'll might have follow-up interviews or other sessions to address those topics. And I will come back with you guys in a day or two, like I mentioned, to share about the retreat, and we have more programs coming up for you guys. Thank you so much, and please join our mailing list on our website, and I see you guys again soon. Thank you so much, heroes. Bye.